Be ambitious, be bold, aim for that promotion, aim for the bonus, but know that to continue to do that work and to do it long term, you need to put some boundaries short term.
Welcome to Wellness. I'm your host, Ashley Daly. I'm a certified sports nutrition coach, former personal trainer and Pilates instructor, and I have a degree in kinesiology. I'm here to support you in upgrading your life through biohacking. Whichever platform you're streaming this podcast on, it would mean the world to me if you could leave a review, as it helps listeners just like you find this hidden health information faster. America hasn't updated its beauty laws in over 80 years, and the cosmetics industry is highly unregulated, meaning harmful chemicals are hiding in your typical drugstore and big box products. But ARAZA Beauty is the first paleo-certified makeup line in the US, made with real ingredients you can pronounce. No parabens, phthalates, hidden toxins like PUFAs, titanium dioxides, or silicone fillers. Their formulas are nourishing and actually good for your skin. Visit arazabeauty.com/Ashley Daly, ARAZA. That's arazabeauty.com/Ashley Daly. Today's guest is Charlène Gisèle, a former lawyer turned high performance coach and burnout expert. She's the founder of the Charlène Gisèle coaching method, helping ambitious professionals avoid burnout and thrive without sacrificing their careers. With certifications in clinical hypnotherapy and NLP, Charlène is also a TEDx speaker and podcast host who's been featured in outlets such as The Times and BBC. Get ready to learn practical, proven strategies to perform at your best while protecting your well-being. Charlène, welcome to the show.
Ashley, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be with you today.
I am really excited to have you here, especially because you're a TEDx speaker. But before we get into why you're here, I would love if you could give my listeners a bit of your background story.
You know, I want to say though, when you say TEDx, I'm so happy, but my heart sinks a little bit because I have some TEDx drama to tell you. So why don't I give you the bio and the intro, and then if you want to ask me about TEDx drama, we can dive into that.
Okay, deal.
So my name is Charlène, and one of the reasons actually I did a few TEDx, and here's the drama part, is because along the years and somewhat accidentally, I became a burnout advisor. Now, one doesn't typically wake up wanting to become a burnout advisor. I would say that one becomes a burnout advisor out of a very, very tough moment of realization that I had a total breakdown, mentally, physically, emotionally, lost a career that I loved, a previous marriage that really was not reflecting my values anymore. And so found myself so conflicted, driving myself to the ground, really working so much. And I decided to just leave it all and reconsider, recalibrate, reset, and actually become a clinical hypnotherapist and a professional burnout advisor. But I think it's important to say that I couldn't have been true to my clients if I hadn't done the deep work first. So I really needed to pause and understand how to heal myself, but also what I got wrong before I could serve others.
Ooh, well, I like that there's a lot of pieces within that bio that I feel like we can dive into. So I want to hear about the TEDx drama.
Oh my goodness. It is actually the first time I'm going to talk about it publicly. So you've got breaking news. So I've had a wonderful TEDx, and it was very special to me because it was to talk about my burnout, but also my father's burnout. And he's a heart attack survivor. He burnt out on his way to work on a Monday morning, and he had a heart attack and then was followed by a stroke. And that's the moment in time that made me realize that burnout is literally life or death, right? You can, one day be working and the next day be facing potential death or diagnosis at a hospital. And that was the moment that pivoted my whole life. And my father is the reason why I decided to be an attorney, but he's also the reason I decided to stop being an attorney when he had his burnout-driven heart attack. So it was so significant for me to bring him to the stage of the TEDx. And they actually allowed that. And he came onto the stage And, he's recovered. So he's now fit and healthy, but it's still a big effort for him. He had to travel and, take a plane and trains and prep for the stage. So it was a really big event for him. And unfortunately, this is the tough part. This is the drama. The TEDx team did not press record on the voice and the sound. So we have image, but we don't have sound. So that was the tough part. But as life so happens, as I came out of this TEDx, I was contacted by another TEDx to tell me that they wanted to hear my story and my burnout, to talk to their students, because I've been working with many students and they did a lot of work on burnout prevention for students, not just professional. And I wholeheartedly said yes. And by the time I was on stage for that second TEDx, which is now the one which is publicly available, I found out that I would never have two, but just that one TEDx. So it's
Oh,
incredible in a way. Life took away a TEDx and gave me another one.
oh my
So there
gosh.
you go.
Well, so lovely of you to see that, perhaps a door closed, but a window opened.
Quite literally.
And I'm hoping it was a good experience for your dad despite not being able to be recorded.
We actually talk about it with so much love, and it was fantastic. He spent a whole week in the runner up to the event in London, and he's a huge Beatles fan. So I took him to the famous place where the Beatles sang their songs, and he had the best time. He loves traveling, and I don't think we would have had that sort of integration piece of spending 1 week together, because we were prepping for the event and spending as much time as possible, just having that mindset and that headspace. And it made that event so special. And what was even more special was the celebration, because we all thought the event was recorded. So
Oh,
all my friends and family gathered, and we had a beautiful meal at one of my favorite private clubs in London. And I will treasure that for the rest of my life. So yes, I'm grateful still.
oh. I love to hear the optimism in your voice. But now I want to go back even further to when you were a lawyer and hear about your life and what you're wanting to share.
I didn't really have much of a life. I think that's a really good question. I don't think I thought about what life should be. I just was obsessed with work. It's interesting when I say that I'm a former addict or a recovered addict. People say, "Oh, were you drinking, or what was your drug of choice?" It's like we're socially conditioned to think that when you talk about recovery and sobriety and being a recovered addict, it has to be alcohol or drugs. And of course, those are really crucial to talk about. And I do a lot of work around alcohol and drugs, but the kind of recovery that I'm talking about was from work. I was a workaholic, and many substances are addictive in this world, but I think work is by far the most addictive, because it's one that is actually praised socially. So, when you go at a networking event, everybody knows somewhat that it's not a great idea to get totally drunk in front of your colleagues. I mean, of course, we don't respect the rules and we do it anyway, and then regret that awful Christmas party where we did God knows what. But overall, at a societal level, there is a sort of a common consensus and agreement that it's not a great idea. If you start to do drugs, and your loved ones, your community members, if they really care about your well-being, they're not going to encourage you. They're not going to call your drug dealer and say, please get them more. But with work, even your mom and dad, who love you more than anything, are going to say, oh, sweetie, so you're going to get a promotion. Wow, that's a really good bonus. Wow, that's a really great firm. We're so proud of you, sweetie. Well done. So people that love you so much, that literally gave birth to you, actually give you those encouragement to get more and more of that hit, because they're proud and proud and prouder. And especially for children of type A parents, which is my case, a lot of my father's love, I don't want to say was conditional upon how good I was, but there was a big element of the more successful I was, the brighter I was, the more I could join the greatest law firm and deal with the greatest client, the prouder he was. He would love me no matter what, but I was conditioned to think that a lot of his love was dependent upon my success. I've learned now with a lot of therapy and a lot of coaching that was my story, right? And it was my interpretation, and that was not the case. But you have this pressure, and then so you work more and more, and you get totally addicted to work. And I don't think that we think about work as an addiction often enough.
I really appreciate you sharing that story, Charlene, because I haven't heard anything like that quite before. And you're right when people say, well, what's your drug of choice, or what had you been drinking? And I feel like I really resonate with it because I used to work with this girl, and her LinkedIn title said workaholic. And she just said to me when I first started at this company, she said she was always working. Her phone was always on. Whenever her clients needed her, she was always on. And straight away, I thought, I don't want to be like that. So, what was the catalyst, or what was your pivotal moment to say, I don't want to live like this?
I had a few. I had a few. So I had the health one. So I was diagnosed with general anxiety disorder and chronic insomnia. And I remember thinking that, and when I say thinking, I have to say that my thinking was probably not the best, because when you're an insomniac, you're not as rational, right? Because sleep deprivation really affects your emotion and you become more and more reactive. But I thought to myself, well, now that I can't sleep anyway, I might as well be working more, right? So you see where the mindset was going. So I almost became more addicted to the all-nighters, to the late night deadlines, because, well, if I got home, I couldn't sleep, so I might as well work. And then something else happens, which was when I got through my separation with my ex husband. I also remember thinking, as devastating as it was, that I now had even more time for work, right? Because I didn't have to go home, and I didn't have to be available, and I didn't have to play other roles which were around, being a wife, or which I was clearly not doing a great job at. So when you realize that actually everything is, how can I work more? That becomes so negative. But I have to be honest, I don't think that I would have made any changes if it wasn't for the fact that I confronted my father's heart attack and I saw my future. When he was there lying in his hospital bed, I honestly thought this was me in 20 years' time if I kept working this way. Maybe not even 20.
Mm. Oh, it's so it hurts my heart to hear that you were so excited to work more because now you didn't really have to focus on being a wife. And that it sounds like maybe the moment was when you saw your father and said, I don't want to be like that. So tell me, what were the pieces during your marriage and your career as a lawyer that started to fall apart?
That's a really good question. There are a lot of red flags when you burn out, but you behave like an addict. So you're not particularly true to yourself or others. So I'll give you a couple of examples. I remember when I was working at the weekend, sometimes I would go into the office because I was completely obsessed with my work. And I felt like I had to be the first one to go into the office. And I felt like I had to be the last one, not necessarily because of the perception for other colleagues, but because I wanted to. I wanted to get the best cases and do all the best work that I could. And I remember a couple of times where friends would ask me to make plans, go for a coffee, something simple. Like there was this brunch on a Saturday that really struck me. And it's embarrassing for me to admit, but I didn't tell the truth to my friends. I said I had another plan because I couldn't bring myself to admit that I was spending my Saturday in the office, because I felt like they would judge me and they would not understand why I couldn't go to brunch if I was working. Or they would say, your work sounds really overbearing. You should work somewhere else. I didn't want to confront that judgment, and I didn't want to hear the things I know they would tell me and they were right about. So I just canceled, make something up. And then that morphed into making zero plans at all. So very quickly, I went from canceling plans to making no plans because I loved my friends so much that it hurt me to constantly cancel and have to make shit up effectively. So I would just not make plans. So I went for a period, and I'm a very social creature, of months and months and months with literally no social plans in my diary, just because I didn't want to hurt my friends and cancel last minute because I knew I would with work. So that's a really big red flag. If you see that your behavior is changing so much so that you have to hide the fact that you're working, just think of it like, if you're an alcoholic, you're most likely going to hide the bottles that you're consuming, and you're most likely going to do things as difficult to confront as going to the toilet to drink so that you're not being judged by your spouse, your husband, your wife, your girlfriends, etc. Right? Well, I also hid working from my spouse, from my friends. So you see
Mm.
how it's the same compulsive behavior. I remember my ex-husband asking me, it was really late, it was in bed, and I was on my laptop, and he was like, "Oh, I bet you're working still." And I was like, "No, no, no." And I quickly opened a browser for some kind of online shopping so that he wouldn't think that I'm working. So I was hiding work. It's just a very odd thing when you get to that position, right? Like, um, and the truth is that's I had nothing else to hide. Like, I was genuinely working. That's all I was doing.
Oh, I really appreciate these stories, and I can feel how it sounds like you were so conflicted. There is the praise part of it, but then it's also tearing at the seams of your life. I'm wondering, Charlene, if someone is hearing this story and they say, that kind of sounds like me, what kind of advice do you have? Where do we start?
Radical honesty. You really have to look at what you're doing and say, are those behavior that align with my values? So for me, one of the map and the frame that really worked was, this notion of integrity. And I realized that I was not living up to any personal values. So what do I mean by that? I actually sat down with myself and I thought, right, so everything that's to do with my current life is dictated by my work ethics values. What are those? Integrity to my clients and to the firm, being the best lawyer that I can be. So, ambition, justice, drive, success, conscientiousness, discipline, punctuality, right? All of those, they were so crucial to me. They were values that I would, you know, live by every day and embody more than anything else in the world. That was the kind of discipline I had towards work. But then I sat down and I thought, what about my life values? What are those? Health? None. There was nothing that I'm doing to look after my health, at least back then. Love? Well, yes, love is really important to me, but am I loving my family when I don't see them? Am I loving my spouse when I'm away? Am I loving my friends when I cancel plans or don't make plans with them? Is that love? Is that the kind of love I want to give them? Fun? Like, I love humor. If you get to know me well, you know that I like to think I have a good sense of humor. I like to joke. I'm very humorous. That was completely gone. Like, I wasn't funny. I wasn't making jokes, and it's a very big value for me. So there was nothing fun anymore. And then creativity. I'm not an artistic person, but I'm very creative. I've always had a creative outlet, be it, spending time in nature, doing yoga. For me, creativity has different taste and sound and feel than what you would think of as your traditional arts and craft, listening to music, going to the opera, watching a ballet. For me, those are creative outlets. None. All was gone. So then, if all you're doing is living by your work ethic values and you're neglecting and sacrificing all your personal life values, are you really living by your true values? And I wasn't. So for me, that realization completely made me shift the way I wanted to integrate those values. And I made a bit of a covenant with myself that in my next life, life 2.0, my new career, my new work, my new family, my new husband, I would do things very differently and I would hold all my values at the same level.
Hmm. Was there no way for you when you were in that relationship and being a lawyer? Was there no way for you to start integrating more of those values and lessening what you were doing at work?
I'm sure there would have been, but I wasn't aware of that yet. That realization and that level of insights came through going to see a clinical hypnotherapist, working with a coach, living in an ashram and meditating for 3 months, doing all this deep dive. Frankly, the tools, even just the value mapping and all of this realization, I just did not have back when I burnt out. And I would love to think that if a little fairy came and whispered to me in my ears at night, then I would have had the tools that I needed. But I have to be honest, I'm not too sure that my burnt out brain would have been able to integrate all of that back then. It had to be phased and it had to be almost like seasoned. I had to like season 1, season 2, season 3, season 4, because true burnout, when you're really, really burnt out, people say that it takes 3 months to recover. I'm more of a conservative school that thinks that it's truly like you're looking at a year recovery plan, especially if you've gotten to the point like me where it's reached clinical diagnosis level, where you have actual clinical conditions. You're looking at a year, maybe 2, to fully recover, because your nervous system is so wrecked that you need a lot of time and a lot of psychology as well. So your question is terrific, and yes, if a fairy godmother came to me in my sleep, which I didn't have, and told me those things which I didn't know, maybe, but I'm not sure my burnt out brain was ready for it.
Now, I'm also trying to think if someone is experiencing burnout, but maybe not to the degree that you had it. They're not quite hiding their work, but they know they're working too much. Are there any other telltale signs?
Yes, of course, of course. So telltale signs where you can absolutely take action and you don't have to quit your job. You don't have to go to an ashram, and you please do not divorce your spouse, right? Like, I'm actually, a lot of the work that I do is pro-marriage. When a couple is really struggling and burnout is weighing on them, I do a lot of work to make sure that they rebuild the intimacy and the communication and do some boundaries so that the marriage can stay and the couple can rekindle their love. So that's one of my favorite work to do with couples. But before we come on to that, what I would say to answer your question is, if you're noticing that at emotional level, you just have less to give. So in other words, your wife, your husband is coming through the door and the first thing you do is you snap, right? You reactive. You're not really patient. You had dinner, great example, you're on date night and they're talking and you're not listening, right? They're talking, you hear the sound of their voice, but you're not processing the information because you're thinking about your emails, you're thinking about your boss, you're thinking about your deadlines. These telltale signs that I would say are very reversible. In other words, like, this is not an indicator that you're going to go through a divorce or you're going to go through a diagnosis. This is an indicator that you're just getting close to burnout and you should take a step back, put your phone away, go for walks with your spouse, and just work on rebuilding communication. Another example that is really reversible is if you're noticing that you're stress snacking a whole lot more. In other words, you had a really stressful meeting and you go and you raid your freezer and you go and have all the ice cream in the world, or you eat the crisps or muffins, donuts, whatever is your thing. Then it's an awareness piece, right? What can I do instead? Or what can I do instead to course correct so that my stress doesn't get to the point that I need to stress snack? Or what can I do instead of snacking so that I don't have to have a stress response to that particular stressors, right? So those are examples. Another one is if you're drinking more than you used to. So a lot of my clients, being female or male clients, have a bit of a mindset that goes along the way of, I've had a really rough day. Where is my Chardonnay? And the worse the day, the bigger the glass. So if that's the mindset again, if you're drinking to cope, that's a red flag. I say to my clients, as a rule of thumb, you're drinking to cope, red flag. If you're drinking to celebrate or to mark an occasion or because you're with your spouse and it's date night, like, we're talking about two very different kinds of drinking. So just really being conscious of what kind of drinking you're indulging in will be another good, very reversible telltale sign and prevent burnout in its cause.
It sounded like you really liked your job. What kind of advice do you have for someone who says, I really like my job and I like working and I don't think I'm being that unhealthy?
I love that question. I would give you the same advice as I would give the advice if you ask me, how do you keep your husband? We know that even if you love your husband a whole lot, very, very much, you don't want to be always with him and always on his back and always available and always clinging. That's not going to last, right? So people, relationships that you love so much, you also learn to let go of and trust and have in moderation, so that, there can be space and freedom and clarity, right? If you put a couple together, husbands and wife, and you lock them in a prison cell 24 hours a day for 7 days in a row, they'll pick up a
Like
flight.
COVID.
Right? Well, there is such a thing as COVID divorces, right? There is COVID babies, COVID pets, but there is also COVID divorces. So it depends which category you're in. So I would say it is a bit like a relationship. In all seriousness, if you really love your work so much that you want to preserve it, you want to keep it for the foreseeable future, then learn to love it with moderation. Be ambitious, be bold, aim for that promotion, aim for the bonus, but know that to continue to do that work and to do it long term, you need to put some boundaries short terms. So that's the definition of a healthy kind of love. My love with my work, my previous work, was a kind of, like the passionate, everything is amazing and you never need to stop, that kind of love. We also know that that kind of love is not very sustainable, because it's a 24/7, it's intoxicating, and you're like in a rush and you behave like an addict. Be it relationship, big work, this is not sustainable kind of love. Even movies tell you that, right? So I think there is a lesson to be learned there. If you love it, then learn to preserve it for the future. That's why I always ask quite a provocative question. And I know it's a bit morbid, but the question is, are you working in a way that is setting a path for you to survive your success?
Mm.
If the answer is no, because you're, working yourself to the ground, you're about to get a diagnosis, your doctors have warned you, your friends have warned you, that's not surviving your success. How many early premature deaths do I see in my line of work because of heart condition, type 2 diabetes, cancer, whatever condition that is related to your metabolic health and stress level, that could have been prevented if the person was not as stressed, as anxious, as overworked, as burned out, right? So are you about to survive your success, to enjoy the fruits that you've planted, or are you just going to burn out before you reach the pinnacle of your success?
Oh, I really like that question that you ask people, and it gets them thinking. And it got me thinking about my stepmom, who had a really horrible boss one time. It was so horrible, and my stepmom kept getting hives, and they wouldn't go away. They would go away on the weekends, and then they would come back during the week. And eventually, she quit her job, and she never had hives again. And I like this idea of, is your success going to, what did you say?
Are you going to survive your success?
Yes. Are you going to survive your success? Because she realized for her, it wasn't worth it. And it sounds like when you saw your dad in the hospital, it wasn't worth it. So I want to hear about that moment when you said, I'm quitting.
Yeah, it was a moment, but it was also just the realization that this could not continue, and that at least back then I didn't feel that there were so many options for me. So, just a quick story, when I initially, and this is not at all me pointing fingers or blaming, like I'm very grateful for the medical profession, but unfortunately, at least my personal experience, back when I burnt out and I went to seek professional help, before I found coaches, before I found clinical hypnotherapists, I went to the traditional doctor route. And what I was told was that I was having a nervous breakdown, and I was offered a bunch of antidepressants. Now, as a type A, super proud, super ambitious lawyer, none of those options are really helpful, right? Being told that you have a nervous breakdown, like I don't even know what that means. I don't think this is particularly empowering, or being given a bunch of antidepressant without really an end tail to it. So I remember asking the doctor, okay, so for how long should I take this drug? Oh, we'll reassess in a few months. So is this a life sentence? I should take antidepressants. Am I depressed? But I knew deep down that this label really did not fit right. I never considered myself depressed. I was never numb. I was never all the symptoms, of course, Dr. Google, right? You go and look, and it just didn't feel right. So when I had this experience and I was started to talk to other folks in the industry like me, bankers, lawyers, but also surgeon, doctors, all the profession that have such heavy demands, traders, financiers, be it in Canary Wharf or on Wall Street, I noticed that we all had one thing in common, is that when we knocked at the doctor's door, there was not a lot of tools given to us. So I can give you a sick note, you can go on stress leave, or we can give you a bunch of antidepressant. Now, that's not really helpful when you're ambitious. So, and it may sound really ambitious as a statement, but I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to be the ambassador of Burnout is Real, and I'm going to create a profession which I believe should exist, which is being a burnout advisor. I really wish I looked for someone like me back then, but I couldn't find that person. So I became the person I felt I needed back when I burnt out, so that folks who feel the way I felt get better help than I did.
I love that so much. Thank you for sharing that story. I love that you wanted to be a burnout ambassador, because I feel like so many people pile so much onto their plates and they don't know where to start.
That's so true. That's so true. And it's still quite new. What I mean by that is the word burnout was actually associated with health all the way back to the 1970s. But it took up until 2019, which is, yesterday really, for the World Health Organization to recognize burnout as a professional thing, as a
Wow.
condition, right? So only in 2019 did the World Health Organization recognize burnout as a condition related to overwork and stress in the professional realm, which is really interesting to note. So beforehand, not saying that it was an illusion, but it wasn't really recognized. So I think it's important to reiterate the fact that it is relatively new.
And I love that you also wanted to keep searching for answers. That ambitious side of you that was like, okay, well, I can take antidepressants, but for how long? Like, let's talk game plan here. And it seems like game plan is all part of your strategy, Charlene.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is also why I thought I was definitely not depressed. Like burnt out, yes, but depressed, no. Because for me to be thinking like, how long? I need to know what's the strategy. How do I come off? Give me a roadmap. I need a year strategy. Okay,
Yes.
so we need to look at other solutions.
Yes, it reminds me. So I have a friend who I love dearly, and she didn't take a vacation for 2 years because she just said, my work is so important. I'm paraphrasing. I love her. I don't want her to think that I'm not thinking her work isn't important. But in my mind, when I was getting ready to see her and I was so excited to see her, I was like, if you got hit by a bus tomorrow, heaven forbid, your work would go on. So, how do you help someone see that their work is important, but you want to help them survive their success, as you said?
It's really interesting that you've chosen this story about what if you got hit by a bus, because a lot of my clients have a hit by a bus moment. What do I mean by that? When you get to the burnout phase, you often enter into a phase which is very severe and quite dark, which is called the phase of escape fantasies. And during that phase, you're not quite suicidal, but you do fantasize about escapes. Now, when we say escape fantasies, you're thinking I'm talking about buying a plane ticket to Bali. Not that kind. Mm-mm. Escape fantasies in the context of burnout is actually really dark, really deep, and it's the person fantasizing at work that when they leave the office today, they'll get hit by a bus. And what a fucking relief, because then they don't have to go back to work tomorrow. Right. So it's actually very, very sad, and it's very, very deep, and it's very common, but it's quite embarrassing. So it's very often that I have a client tell me, I to the car, and the road was an 8-hour drive because I was going to visit folks out of town, and I hadn't slept for 3 days. And I knew that there was a very high chance that I was going to crash the car, and I was hoping that would happen. So the reason I said your question was just almost, like giving me goosebumps when you asked it is, are you getting hit by a bus moment? Are you getting, is your mind playing tricks on you? So I'm going to give you another example, which was one of my students, right? And she was, full of life, really bright, but she was totally burnt out already as a student. And she started to build a fantasy around how she could escape her exams, and she literally actually boiled and scalded her forearm so that she wouldn't have to go sit the exam, so that she had to be evacuated and taken to the hospital for the burn. People do that. People do this all the time. I've had clients consider literally breaking a leg so that they wouldn't have to go to work, because they would never admit anxiety or stress or burnout. But if they got to A&E and they have a broken leg, who can blame them?
Wow. Those are really impactful examples. So, what does it look like when someone works with you?
A lot of accountability and a lot of disclosure. I do a lot of white glove bespoke services. So because of the line of work being burnout advisor that I work in, there is a lot of intimate conversation that need to be had. So I like to go deep. I like to make sure that the person feels comfortable to talk about their relationship to work, their relationship to self, their relationship to others. And I don't like to leave any corners unknown or any stones unturned. I need to know as many details. So I often start the conversation with, what does your life look like when you wake up till the moment you go to sleep, if you go to sleep? Like, I want to know everything you take, everything you think, and everything you do. When do you take your phone for the first time? What is your first thought when you grab your phone? Is it, oh shit, that's going to be another awful day? Is it, yay, I get to work in this amazing organization? What do you tell yourself before you go to bed? Is it, wow, I've had another success in the office? Or is it, oh no, I need to get ready for another day yet again? I want to know your inner voice. I want to meet all different voices in your head, not because you're schizophrenic, because we all have voices in our head. And I want to know what you do about those. How do you respond to those voices? How do you soothe them, or how do you numb them? Do you nurture them? Do you take care of them, or do you just want to squash them?
I like these examples, and I like that there's so much humor in it too, because I feel like when someone needs to see someone, or they decide to make the decision to see someone, they do feel a bit broken and embarrassed.
Oh, so that makes me happy, because it means that, I'm fully recovered. If you can feel that there is a bit of humor in my method, humor is a healer. I really believe that. And I like to think that however intense and however serious, and I never ever belittle the serious aspect of burnout. And, there are many life or death situations that I get involved with. But I really believe that a little touch of humor at the right appropriate time just brings that human nature in us. And if you can laugh even just a little bit, like just something releases. And yeah, I believe that humor is a healer. I use it a lot.
So I have a friend who is she's a tax accountant. She's a CPA. And where she works around tax time, they will bring around booze trolleys and carts with snacks. So you literally don't even have to get up out of your desk to go to the kitchen. They will bring it to you. And I'm wondering, what are some tips that you have to maybe get out of a toxic work environment?
That's a really good question. So what I like to do is create either psychological or physical boundaries around things that are temptation. So if you go to AA, or if you do work around addictions, be it work addiction or drugs or any kind of addiction, you would know that you need to create some form of separation from the temptation. So if you know that you're going to be tempted by the booth being provided or the food being provided, one of the things that you could do is, for instance, what I do, which is a lot of batch cooking at the weekend. I love to prepare, plan, sometimes over plan, and schedule so that I'm actually always fed and fueled to a point that I don't leave the situation open to temptation whereby I could feel a little bit hungry and then add a dash of stress and add a dash of social influence. That's me raiding the office cabinet for muffins or cakes, etc. So setting some measures in place where you know what are you going to be the things that are going to sabotage your intention, but also go back to what was your intention in the first place. Do you currently have a challenge around your nutrition because you're trying to lose those 5 stubborn pound, or do you have a challenge around booze because you're trying to do 3 nights sober a week? So what's your goal? What's your intention? And how would that behavior, aka saying yes to the cake or saying yes to the booze in the office, misalign with the intention that you set at the beginning? So the awareness piece is really important because very often we do things on autopilot. We don't actually triage. Do I really want to say hell yes or hell no? We just do it because it's social pressure, because it's stress, because it's anxiety, because it's burnout. But when you actually think that every single thought, every single thing that you eat, that you consume, every single thought that you accept or entertain is a conscious and intentional decision, then you have a whole lot of control. And the type A brain loves control. So what I say to my client is, who are you giving up that control to? Who is bossing you around? That demon in your head that's saying that you are going to have the cookie? You're not stronger than that other voice in your head? Really? And usually the type A gets a bit activated by that, right? It's like, yeah, I can boss that voice around. Okay, then do it.
Oh, I like that so much. And it seems like it comes down to values. Again, you have
Oh,
to know what your
always.
values are.
Always. Yes.
I would love to hear how you overcame insomnia.
Oh, clinical hypnotherapy. I really believe in it so much. It revolutionized my life. I met a wonderful hypnotherapist. It was not a magic bullet in the sense of one session and job done. There was an element of repetition. My insomnia was really deep rooted. It came from many, many years of preconditioned thinking, and as I mentioned, from when I was a student. So there was there was a lot of work to unpack. So it took a good, I would say, 10 session in total, but the effect was really permanent. Nothing is totally permanent in life. I need to top it up, but permanent in the sense of the absence of a total relapse. What do I mean? I mean that I have to top it up by putting boundaries in place. So I know that I'm prone to insomnia. I know that I'm not to be trusted around sleep. I know that I have to put measures and boundaries and system in place because that's always going to be a demon that I dance with. But I haven't relapsed because I've learned how to protect myself against the temptation.
You mentioned boundaries a few
Yes.
times. What kind of boundaries should we be starting to implement?
So it may either disappoint you or bring you great amount of joy. I don't know which way. So let's see. But my boundaries are actually incredibly simple, but terribly powerful. My preferred boundaries are my diaries, my scheduler. So, for example, sleep. If you go into my diary right now, I put a hard stop of when I need to stop to get enough rest for my brain to practice my own self hypnosis and sleep meditation to fall asleep. So I literally have a reminder that says sleep, do not delete exclamation mark in my diary. That's the type of boundary that I need to protect things that I know are fundamental to my well being. Now, your boundary could be different, but I believe in physical boundaries. So, physical, can be electronical, of course. But for me, I need to have a reminder. I need to set up an alarm. I need to have it in my scheduler. I need to diarize my boundary. That's my boundaries. Same with my husband. I have date nights in our diaries. I know at first that may not sound sexy, but it's very effective because I learned from my first unsuccessful marriage that if you don't do that, then you're not going to meet your spouse. You're just going to do something else instead, and that's going to be work. So now, when I have it in my diary, as unsexy as it may sound, I'll show up. I'll get ready. I'll get a notification to get ready, and I'll be super present. And because it was in my diary, I planned around it, and I don't give myself permission to cancel it.
Oh, I love that so much. And I feel like it really resonates with me because my husband and I are doing long distance. He's in London, I'm in New York City. And if we don't have our virtual date nights, it feels like things can be unraveling because I just need to see his face. I want to cook a meal with him and hear about his day. So I love that you put it in your calendar. And that was going to lead me to my other question. I was wondering if you had found love again.
Yes, yes, yes. I'm happily married. And he's just brilliant and very understanding of the challenges I came with. It was a full package. But I know that traditionally in the world of divorces, a divorce is perceived as technically a failure of a marriage. And I can see that from a semantical standpoint. Arguably, a divorce is a failed marriage, right? That's pretty clear. But I'm actually quite proud of my divorcee status, and the reason I say that is when I met my now husband, I felt that I had so much to give in terms of learn mistake. And I don't say that lightly. It really literally cost me a marriage in my previous life. So when I came into this new relationship, I came with a lot of humility about things that I had learned, but things that I was yet to master as well. And I wanted it to be a bit of a dance between lessons that I didn't want to go unlearned and lessons that I was yet to learn, and how I would embody that with someone that gives me the space to also reflect and say, oh, that feels a little bit familiar and I've been there before and I don't want to repeat that because X and Y. And I actually think that divorces are fantastic spouses because we've learned a lot of mistakes and we don't repeat them in the new
Yes.
marriage. So there you go. That's my take on it. I
I
am
like to hear that.
proudly remarried.
Yes, I love that. Can you give us some marriage advice? What should we be looking for to have a healthy relationship?
Presence. I think that's number one. Just really somebody talking, just listen. That communication piece is so basic, but we just don't do it. And having rituals and moments where you feel that you have an opportunity to actually be transparent and be honest with each other and meet expectation. I think a lot of tension and conflict in marriages happen out of unspoken expectations. So I'm super pissed off with you today, and the other person says, "Well, why? You've been in a terrible mood all day." Well, the truth is that I thought you would do this last night and you didn't, and I thought you would do this morning and you didn't, and I was like, when did you tell me that you expected me to do this and that and this? Because I didn't get the memo. Somehow you built up a case in your mind that you had all those expectations of me, but you never communicated them. So you have unspoken expectation that I haven't met, but I didn't know about. Right? So when you get to that position, then there is a conflict. So one thing I would say is just as contractual and transactional as it may sound, set your expectations.
I feel like you have given us so many actionable takeaways today. I have loved chatting with you, Charlene. And as we wrap up this podcast, I ask all my guests the same closing question, which is, what haven't I asked you that you'd like my listeners to know?
How do I see the future?
Let's go to the future. Let's hear about it.
I see the future with lots of space for creativity. And actually, that's why I love podcasting so much, because as much as it falls into the work category, for me, it's storytelling, it's creativity. And I've unlocked that creative side that is such big equation of the anti-burnout protocol. So the way I see my future is with so much more creativity even, and the gift for me to give or continue to give to my clients, whatever creativity means to them. For me, it's podcasting and humor and storytelling, is think about what would life look like with more creativity? Like, what would you do with that? And I think just that question gives you so much perspective.
I love that. Well, I fibbed a little bit. I have one more question, because now I want to ask you, since we're on the topic of the future, let's put yourself in the future 10 years from now, and let's ask Charlene, what does your day look like? I want to know everything from the moment you wake up. What's your first thought to the time you go to bed?
10 years from now, I would most likely have little ones to look after. So I'll be a well-slept mom. I know that's a bold thing to say, but I do believe in hypnobirthing and hypnotherapy for little ones and mommies. So I do not want to be a sleep-deprived mom. That's really important to me. And I want to have a life where when I wake up, I take my family for a nature walk, and then I set up for my day by cooking a healthy breakfast, and then set the tone of the clients that I'm going to look after, and I can communicate a message around burnout that has grown and influenced more of the industry leaders, so that we see less intervention and more prevention.
Charlene, can you please tell my listeners where they can go to learn more about you and potentially work with you?
Yes, so the number one tool to use would be my podcast. Actually, I have a podcast that is released every Wednesday on burnout prevention, and it's a podcast that has all different kind of interviews around the topic of high performance that meets well-being. And then if you want more resources, I also have guides on shopping for food for burnout prevention, and meditation and hypnotherapy for burnout. So I will give you access to all those tools.
Amazing. I love it. Well, we will be sure to point listeners in the right direction. Charlene, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening today. A quick shout out on Instagram or sharing this podcast with a friend can make a positive difference. If you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or watching on YouTube, a great way to support the show is by leaving me a review. You can also support my work by using any of the affiliate links in my show notes or by visiting my website, ashleydaily.com. This podcast is presented for educational and exploratory purposes only. The published content is not intended to be used for diagnosing or treating any illnesses, diseases, or disorders. Those responsible for this show disclaim any responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of this information presented by myself or my guests. Please consult with your healthcare provider before using any products or services referenced in this podcast. The content here is for informational purposes only. Episodes on the Welcome to Wellness podcast may at times cover sensitive topics, including but not limited to depression, suicide, 5G, nootropics, circumcision, birth control, the Women's Health Initiative, the use of plants medicine, abortion, geoengineering, terrorism, gender, AI, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. You are advised to refrain from listening to this podcast if you are likely to be offended or adversely impacted by any of these topics. However, if these topics interest you, you just may have found your tribe. The information or opinions expressed on the Welcome to Wellness show are solely the views of the individuals involved and by no means represent absolute facts. Opinions expressed by the host and the guests can change at any time. The views of my guests are solely their views, and the Welcome to Wellness show does not accept responsibility for them. Any action you take based on the information contained within this show is strictly at your own risk. The Welcome to Wellness host, Ashley Daly, will not be liable for any losses or damages in connection with the use of this podcast. You should take all necessary steps to ascertain the information you receive in this podcast is correct and has been verified. None of the guests or contributors on the Welcome to Wellness podcast will be responsible for your use of the information contained therein. Under no circumstances will the Welcome to Wellness show or my affiliates, partners, suppliers, licenses, or guests appearing on the show be liable for any direct or indirect consequences or damages arising from your ability or inability to access this podcast. All intellectual property property rights belong to me, Ashley Deely, and include, but are not limited to, the copyright and any other rights in the design. You are permitted to use the Welcome to Wellness podcast for personal use, but not commercial use without a license. You may not make recordings. If you breach these terms, you lose the right to access the Welcome to Wellness podcast, and you must destroy or return any copies of the recordings you've made. Guests on the Welcome to Wellness podcast may at times provide information on or read extracts from third-party copyrighted work. The Welcome to Wellness podcast does not provide any medical or professional advice within these episodes. If you take any action or inaction as a result of the content you consume from the Welcome to Wellness podcast, this is based solely on your decision, and the Welcome to Wellness podcast, Ashley Deely, and my guests cannot be held responsible or liable for any of the consequences of such action or inaction. Thank you for listening.